So I tried a lot of gear in 2025. Some of it changed my whole workflow, while some of it didn't even make it a week. So today I'm breaking down every piece of gear I got this year, what stuck, what surprised me, and what flopped. Let's get into it. So we're going to start with what surprised me this year. And I think there's no better place to start on that than the Yamaha Seek Track. Now I got to check this out at NAMM at the beginning of the year. And from then on, I was hoping it would be a sort of missing link for me and for my workflow between the circuit tracks and its performative sequencer and the Digitax sampler and per step parameter locks. It has multiple synth tracks, 7 drum tracks that all use one shots. But the thing that intrigued me the most at NAMM, and I didn't get to spend a lot of time looking into, was the sampler. So this is where I was hoping it would kind of be that circuit meets Digitac. Now the reality is the sampler is pretty limited. You get 7 sample tracks, but you can't do any sort of sample chopping besides using all of those 7 pads as a single sample. And then you don't have a waveform editor, so if you want to move the start and end points, you have to do it manually, which is fine, but you'd have to waste all 7 sample slots to do that. But what I did find was an incredibly powerful, versatile ideation station. So as a busy parent, there's not a lot of time in every studio sessions. So for me, the Seek Track has been perfect for that ideation phase where I can quickly just get a beat going. And just like that, I've got an idea and then I can change it later. I can throw it into something like the SP, chop it up, do all sorts of sound design, mangling, things like that. So a couple things after using this for a few months. The battery has been surprisingly great. The free app that you can get is a great tool for learning this. You can check out this video next if you're new to the Seek Track or interested in seeing what it can do. But whether you're using the screen or not, there are a ton of bits of text that all rely on these 4 knobs and this one to a degree. There's also buttons on every side. So learning how to use the device without the screen takes a little getting used to. My recommendation is always treat the screen or the app like training wheels and learn how everything works. Then when you find the things you like on the screen, find out how you do those button combos on the Seek Track. It's not a deal breaker. It is fairly intuitive once it starts to make sense. It's kind of like the P-6, which we're going to talk about as well. And while I have my gripes with the sampler, all of the other tracks are very easy to use. There's a lot you can do with it. Every single track has its own individual effect, which you can change. There's amp simulators, distortion, delays, phasers. I mean, if you can think of an effect, it's most likely in there, and there's all kinds of different settings and things like that. There's also some performance aspect similar to the SP or the P6, and there's also a master effect. So for me, the Seek Track is a great ideation station, but it starts to fall apart when it comes to arranging. All right, another surprise for me also started at NAMM this year when I got to check out all of the compacts from Roland. And I'm a huge SH-101 fan. I have a Behringer MS1 and I'm always chasing that SH-101 sound. So when I saw that the S1 was built on that ACB, analog circuit behavior, of their previous generation, I think it was the SH-01, it's like, well, that's intriguing. And I had already had the P6, so I knew the compact setup and workflow. So I went in there, really wanted to check this one out, and I was blown away because not only is it a great sounding SH-101 sort of sound, there's a lot more to it than that. There's the awesome step sequencer. There's parameter locks per step, so you can do really cool automations. You'll see this is a running theme. Something I've really been looking at and looking for in gear this year is parameter locks, where on every step you can do sort of changes. It's also got effects built in. The filter sounds great. Perfect for that SH-101 sound. And the size, I know the keyboard is tiny. It's not the most fun to play. But again, as a busy parent, I don't have a lot of time to be in the studio, but I can sometimes find a little time in the house. And I just use this as sample fodder. So I'll just play on it, recording into something. Before you know it, there's some really cool sounds you can chop up to start a track with. So for me, it's proven to be the perfect grab and go sort of synth. I can take it anywhere. It's pretty tiny, and even combining it with the P6 in a backpack, it's pretty portable. But the one thing that's really stood out to me, well, beyond the keyboard just being not very fun to use, it's functional. But if you notice here, it actually starts on B and not C, and that just throws me off every single time. I'll have a song in a certain key and I go to what I think is the right one and I'm actually hitting B or the wrong note. So that takes a little getting used to, and it's just a small gripe for me, but it is something to mention. But yeah, awesome little synth. The sound design is great. There is menu diving if you want to get to the more complex features, but unlike the P6, there is a lot you can do just on the encoders and right on the UI. All right, so now we're gonna get into what's stuck in my workflow. Those pieces of gear that, while they didn't necessarily surprise me or completely shake my workflow, they became key pieces to my workflow this year. And we're gonna start with probably the most important one, and that's the Roland P-6. When this was announced, I instantly knew I had to get it, and I'm gonna be honest with you, the main reasons were the sample rates, the lo-fi button, and the microphone, which are all things that were missing in the move from the SP404SX to the SP404 Mark II. My first SP was the Mark II, but I always wanted those things, the sample rates. I just love the sound of dropping the sample rate, getting that lo-fi grit. The lo-fi button sometimes is just cool to use. And then the microphone. I like to get sounds from out in the world, seeing what sort of things happen when you put a rock on cement. What sort of sound does that make? Maybe closing a car door, things like that. Randomly getting those sounds that you can use, and with the SP404, the effects there, which are also mostly in the P6, are great for taking those sounds, mangling them into more of a drum sound or background noise. So really, I was hoping for a little SP404 Junior, and what I wasn't expecting is a deep, almost electron workflow. The sequencer is incredibly intuitive on here. I mean, this sequencer beats the SP404 by a long shot. The SP404's TR Rec mode is a decent sequencer for getting an idea down, but this is all laid out right here on the front of the hardware. You can do, let me turn it on here. You can do all sorts of parameter locks. You can parameter lock the start and end point, like we were talking, well, I wish the Seek Track could do. So you can change slices basically on every step for a sample. So there isn't a manual slicing mode on the P6. It's one of its sort of weaknesses, but there is the very quick chop function. The problem with that one is you can't make any adjustments to the chop points. So parameter locking, going in, holding a step and changing the start, I can't do it with just these two hands, but changing the start and end point on each step allows for sample chopping. So it does work very well. It's got a lot of the SP404 effects, so there is that. The one thing is there's only the one effect at a time. You can't have the 4 or 5. There's also something I will mention anytime I bring up the P6. My biggest issue with it is that the bus effects and the send effects run in parallel. So if you do those very cool SP404 scatter or even drop a filter to take out a lot of high end, if you're sending those sounds into the send delay and send reverb, you'll hear them in full without the filter as you do those bus effects. It's really not a good sound. See, this filter's completely on, but you hear how it's not cutting out what's in the send effects? The send effects are after and separate, completely separate from the main bus effect. So this has become one of my favorite samplers, possibly beating the SP404 just by nature of its portability. Like the S1, it's much smaller, it runs on a battery. You can put batteries in the SP, but they're AA's and it's just not fun. But this is an internal battery. It's much smaller. It's easier to carry around. There's far more sequencing power on this, which is so weird because it's cheaper and all that stuff. But anyways, there's much more sequencing power on this, and there's much more performance aspects on the SP. I've done a lot more comparing them. You can check that out, but we do need to move on to the next piece of gear, and that is the Polyend tracker. The tracker workflow has always been something that's intrigued me, but I've never used until this year. If you're not familiar with trackers, it's a typically vertical sample-based workflow. For every step, you can program whatever track you want to use on any step of each of the 8 tracks. It sounds so weird to explain. Hopefully that's making sense. It's an incredibly powerful per step workflow. I've even done a track inspired by Autechre where I change the BPM every step. But yeah, the reason I wanted the Tracker Plus compared to the Mini is I like to play a lot of live instruments, so I liked having all of these pads to perform those parts. I know you can do it on the Mini, but I wanted to have they're not that big, but the slightly larger pads, the more function and things like that, to do that sort of thing. Even with drums, when I chop the drums, I like to do that. Now, the really cool thing with this is pretty much a sort of DAW. It started on computers. The stuff you can do in here, there's a granular synth engine, just like on the P6. There's a wavetable synth. There's an FM radio you can sample. There's the built-in synth engines, drums. Another thing that I love about this is the multi-track audio over USB. You can send all of your tracks out separately, so you can have drums being separate, whatever tracks you separate. That's the really cool thing, but what took me so long to wrap my head around, every track on the tracker, you get 8 tracks and then 8 MIDI tracks, but they're not stuck or limited to a single sound. It's basically an overarching track where on every step you can take any sound from your sample pool or the synths you've set up and put those there. So you could have one sample on track 1 on step 1, and then by step 5 you could have another sample playing on the same track. It's a wonderfully weird workflow, but it's not for everyone. So if you are interested in the tracker, check it out. I think there's some free apps you can get, or programs, like I want to say Renoise is free, but you can get them on your computer. See if you like the workflow. But once it clicks, and if it clicks, it's a very awesome and addicting workflow that you can just make things really fast, but you can get so intricate with all of the per step changes. All right, and for the last piece of gear that stuck for me this year, I actually have to use my iPad because it's not exactly gear, it's software. It's Dr. Vibe from Sketch Audio. Now, this app is insanely powerful. If you're a fan of that old school sampler sound, especially the SP series like the 303, Dr. Vibe is awesome. There's 3 parts to Dr. Vibe, but the compressor, which is called the Mix Slammer, is based on the SP303's compressor. If you do happen to grab this, try I think it's called OG303. That is such a great setting for drums, anything like that. But even better than the compressor, it's got the vinyl section, which does all that sort of vinyl sound if you're familiar with the 404 sim, but you can control all sorts of aspects of it. The noise, the warping of it. The middle one though is the ADC to DAC. Now this is where you can do the sample rates, the bit depth, the filter, so you can get all those really cool sample rates from SPs like the 202 and 303, and even like the P6 in a DAW. Now for me, the reason this stuck in my workflow is oftentimes I'm either working with a DAW-less setup or even in the DAW where I'm not using things like the SP404 and I want to get some of that grit and just lo-fi sound. I throw Dr. Vibe on everything and I drop the sample rates, maybe add a little bit of that compressor, and I've even put it on masters before to just emulate like an SP404. So, you know, if I don't have my SP404 in the chain that I'm doing a song with, Dr. Vibe is my go-to. It's basically my in DAW SP404. All right, so last up, we have to go with what flopped. Now that sounds a little bit harsh. Nothing I list here is bad per se. It just hasn't found its way into my workflow. It's been an interesting year. Being a parent means not a lot of time in the studio. Doing YouTube full time means a lot of editing and needing to get things done quickly. So my setup has been in flux and a lot has been changing. So I was trying different things and not everything stuck, and that's okay. It's totally normal to try new pieces of gear and see if it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But that's not to say these pieces are bad. They just haven't fit in my workflow yet. And I stress yet, because we're gonna start with the Polyend synth. Now this, when it was announced, really intrigued me because, as I've mentioned, with the year I've had, I've been looking to downsize, go less with all sorts of gear plugged into each other, sending MIDI all over, cables routed everywhere, and try to downsize as much as I can to a single sampler and maybe a single synth. But when it comes time for live performance or just having flexibility in sounds, that can be a bit limiting, especially if you're doing something like an S1 and the P6. So I was hoping to use something like this that could add more flexibility, because the Polyend synth has 3 different synths built into it, and you can set them up on this grid any sort of way. And the sounds are awesome, and all of those sounds are basically in the Tracker Plus. And therein lies why it hasn't quite stuck yet. If I ever need those sort of sounds, they're in the Tracker. And usually I'm trying to downsize, right? So I want less gear. So if I have those sounds already in a sampler, I'm just going to use the sampler that has those sounds put in it. I was using this for quite a while for connecting to the SP404 using the looper or even pattern sequencing, and having several different sounds I can either use or latch to sequence, things like that, while the SP is playing the beat. So I really like the performance aspect of this. You can play, you can sequence. Now, one thing, I don't think this has been added in an update, but I would really like to see more of a song mode or sort of sequencer that you can save. There is a step sequencer, so you can program something to play, but you have to actually trigger it on whatever note you want it to play on. But it's not true sequencing where you can save it, similar to like the circuit tracks. You can program on steps. This doesn't have that, at least unless it's been updated very recently, but I don't believe it has that. So that just for me would be a bit more useful, but it is an awesome synth. The sounds are great. Like I said, they're all on the tracker too, so they sound awesome. I did find though that the workflow itself of doing sound design just didn't quite gel with me. You choose the different synth with these 3 buttons. Sorry it's not plugged in, there's no internal battery. And then you have all of these encoders that change different settings, and then each of the different sections of the synth are here: filter, engine, the envelope, LFO, there's the sequencer. You can have that set to follow one of the other synths, so when you play the different keys, it will change the notes that are being triggered that you've programmed in. So there's some really cool stuff there. I think it's very useful. I was also doing MIDI between the Digitact and the synth, and just sending all sorts of MIDI to the synth from the Digitact, and that's a very fun workflow. It's just comes down to, for me, a matter of use, right? If I need those synths, it's there in the tracker, so I'm just gonna use that. Now I am rebuilding my DAW setup to be a synth station, a sample station, so to speak. So basically I'm gonna have just all of my synths laid out on my DAW setup. So rather than having a convoluted MIDI setup and all that stuff, I'm just gonna have synths that are sending audio into a mixer, and the mixer goes into whatever sampler I choose, just one, on the desk. And so that's my way of just having a performance station. So I think the synth is gonna have a sort of rebirth in the studio here with that setup. That's why I've been saying it hasn't found a place in my workflow yet, because I think it's gonna fit there, and it should be really good for getting multi-synth performance that I sample in one go, right? I don't have to play multiple synths at once. I can just play with 2 hands on several of the pads, and I've got multiple synths all at once. So we'll see what happens there. If you're not subscribed, be sure you subscribe to see more on that, and I will be making a video talking about that setup. All right, and the last piece of gear that flopped is also another iOS app. It's Drambo. A student of mine told me about this app because they had sold their Digitact and were missing that sort of Digitact workflow. And so they got Drambo and said it's very much like the Digitact. And so I heard that and instantly was like, okay, I'll buy it because I love the Digitact workflow. Now, the thing is, there's a lot here. And as we have a bit of a running theme here in this video, I haven't had time to really get to learn it. Now, I was hoping this would sort of be something in the house when I don't have time to be out in the studio. I can use this, and it's that sort of Digitact vibe where I can do a lot of per step automation and parameter locks. And I believe all of that is there. It's very powerful. I've watched some videos on it. I just haven't had the time to learn it. That's why it hasn't made it in the workflow yet. That's why it's a total flop for me, because I just don't have the time. But it's not bad. So if you use Drambo, let me know what I should start with here, because in the new year, I do want to start using it a little bit more. And that's all the gear I tried in 2025. What about you? What gear stuck, surprised, or totally flopped in your setup this year? Let me know in the comments. If you want to check out any of the gear in this video, there's a full list linked in the description. And if you want to see this gear in action, watch this video next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.